how many dozens of times did I repeat Henry Kissinger's adage that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. And that's Europe right now. Europe's a friend of the United States. The US is not a friend of Europe, by the way. And it hasn't been a friend of Europe all along. For decades, the US was intent on making sure that Germany and Russia would never form a strong economic bond or political bond. Because the economic connection of Germany and Russia is the most perfect economic connection imaginable. I dreamt of it in 1991, believe me, when I was advising both Gorbachev and Yeltsin and explaining how Russian industry was going to be retooled, and it was going to be retooled with the best engineering in the world, which is German engineering, and how this is going to be mutually beneficial. And of course, the United States would be horrified at that kind of idea. We're trying to break Russia. We're not trying to help Russia, much less for Europe and Russia to get together. So you were led into the most absurd, tragic, avoidable conflict. And to this day, you can't get one honest word out of the Commission or your external affairs people. I can't even speak to Madam Callas. And just a footnote, I advised her father, who was the governor of the Central Bank of Estonia. I designed their kroon. It was one evening in a bar in Tallinn, and we spoke for a few hours about, I explained how a currency board works, and the next morning Prime Minister Mart Laar said, we'll do it. And they did it the next month, and it was a stable currency for the next 15 years till they joined the euro. It was a good evening. It was very productive. They gave me a high national honor, and your external affairs leader will not even speak to me, and hasn't agreed to. Mr. Borrell fired me summarily the day that I said that Nord Stream was destroyed by the U.S. We don't know. Maybe the Ukrainians with the U.S. help did it. I'm not sure. I tend to think that it was just the U.S. It was a pretty complicated operation. But the day that I said that, Borrell said, we don't talk anymore. So this is a strange situation of no truth. One thing to alert you to that I'm going to talk about the current moment. From the Russian perspective, the approach of NATO was not good. It means U.S. bases and weapon systems on the border. And already by 2004, it was in the Baltics and on the Black Sea. And they had read Brzezinski's book too. They knew the timetable, and President Putin said at the Munich Security Conference in 2007, stop now, do not go further. We get it. You've already expanded, you've already violated every promise you made. 7 more countries in 2004, stop. Of course, the United States doesn't stop. It has its project, and so in 2008 in Bucharest, the commitment was made. You can watch the death of Europe from the first day to the second day of that conference when Chancellor Merkel says, I give in. I blocked a map, it was called, a plan for accession to NATO, but I'll agree to the final statement that Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. She writes it in her memoir that she knew that this was the path to war with Russia. But the point that I want to add is that in 2003, the U.S. unilaterally abandoned the anti-ballistic missile treaty. 2002 or 2003. Maybe 2002. Anyway, somebody can check it. This was a very, very decisive event because that was a great stabilizer. And the U.S. started to put in the Aegis missile systems, first in Poland, then in Romania, and it would not even commit not to put them into Ukraine. And so from the Russian point of view, this is just evidence. You want a decapitation strike. Would the U.S. ever make a decapitation strike? Well, yes, obviously it would. And the Russians were rightly very upset about another unilateral action by the United States of destabilization. Then the coup, then the Minsk agreements, and Europe just behaved miserably at every single stage. Couldn't tell the truth, wouldn't see the Russian side at all, wouldn't engage in diplomacy at all, wouldn't defend the Minsk agreements, as both Hollande and Merkel have subsequently said. The agreements that would have stabilized the situation in Ukraine by giving autonomy to the Donbas region. No, they blew it off because the U.S. was not interested, and Europe does what the U.S. says. That's the basic point. And this has gone on basically until today. The war in Ukraine could have easily been avoided at any moment. Up until February 2022, the invasion could have been avoided. I begged Jake Sullivan in December 2021, just say NATO's not enlarging, avoid the war. Jake Sullivan, who's not very clever in my book, said, oh, there's not going to be a war, Jeff. Don't worry, there's not going to be a war. That's what I heard in an hour of begging, avoid a greater escalation. They don't know how to do it. And then in April, an agreement was nearly reached, and Michael von Schulenburg, who's here, has written the absolute most wonderful account of the end of those negotiations, which the US and UK nixed and told the Ukrainians, don't sign an agreement. That's true, by the way. As much as it's denied, it's absolutely true. And I was curious enough, I flew to Ankara to speak to the Turkish diplomats, and they gave me a full account. And one day, the Ukrainians just said, no, we're not negotiating anymore. Just walked out. And this is what Europe is fighting for? Is there just one iota of recognition and honesty about what this is? And when Michael and I were in the Vatican in the spring of 2022, saying, stop the fighting, because nothing good can come out of this. Well, the Ukrainian ambassador was furious, and all the Western ambassadors were furious that we were even there. And had they followed what we wrote, and I wouldn't change a word, Michael, from what we wrote, not a word, it would have saved probably 1 million Ukrainian lives, probably another 1 million casualties. But Europe is standing up for Ukraine by killing all the young men and maybe even deporting the people in Europe right now, which is against international law, by the way. But everyone's flirting with get these people back to Ukraine so they can die on the front line, because we need to keep them fighting for a little bit longer while our remilitarization takes hold. Can anyone believe how this is going? Come on. This is absolutely unacceptable.